Everything has a beginning. Day and night, work and rest, life and death. We are used to the fact that a story always has a beginning. Take, for example, the story of the Kraken princess Ruby Gillman. She broke her mother's ban and dived into the ocean to save her boyfriend, thereby discovering a new world for herself and starting the chain of events that led to her battle at Oceanside. The final defeat of the Mermaid Queen Nerissa, the destruction of the Oceanus Trident, and the revelation to people of the existence of a completely different world, which they did not even suspect. And this story, as we think, has a beginning. It begins with Ruby unsuccessfully trying to invite Connor to the prom. But is it true that this is the beginning? After all, if we go back and trace the entire sequence of events, we will come to the conclusion that this moment was not the beginning, but only a consequence of past actions. Ruby wasn't going to go to the prom until her friend Margot talked her into it. Does this mean that the story began with a conversation between Ruby and her friends on the waterfront? No. After all, this conversation wouldn't have happened if Ruby hadn't tried to persuade her mom to let her go to the prom earlier. And it seems that this is the beginning of the story. Agatha forbade Ruby from attending the prom, which forced Ruby to the fact that, under pressure from her friends, she decided to secretly escape from her to the prom. But no, and this is not the beginning, because if we continue to move back along the chain of events, we can understand that Agatha had special reasons to fear this, because if Ruby had accidentally found out about her nature, it could have led to unpredictable and dangerous consequences, which, in fact, happened. Therefore, her prohibitions and restrictions, although strict, were necessary in order to protect Ruby and the whole family. So, Ruby's story did not begin on one particular day and not because of one particular event, but moved and developed over the years and under the influence of many factors. And this is one of the main features in stories that few people understand. The story has no beginning and no end. How tomorrow becomes today, and today becomes yesterday. Similarly, one event flows into another and creates what we call reality. But history is not just a stream of incoherent events. On the contrary, any event occurs because of specific actions that we perform every day throughout our lives. Each of these events is layered on top of each other, and at specific moments, it brings us to a point where we have to make a choice on which our whole future life depends. This story happened 20 years before that fateful day when Ruby Gillman made a life-changing choice. In those days, when people did not know about the existence of the world that hides under the surface of the ocean. In those days, when there were many giant krakens living in the ocean, and their power over the seven seas was so long and stable that no one had even a shadow of a doubt that it would last forever. They thought so too, and didn't realize how much they were wrong. All this stability was just a shell, under which, over the past 100 years of peace, problems festered and accumulated, which showed their ugly heads at the moment of greatest vulnerability. This story is about a change of epochs, about the end of thousands of years of the dominance of the krakens over other marine races. A story about wrong decisions and a difficult choice between duty and desire, truth and lies, reality and fantasy. This is a story about the beginning of the end. Thunderclouds were gathering in the night sky over the Pacific Ocean. The huge waves tossed the small fishing boat from side to side like a toy. The ship's crew hoped that their vessel would be able to reach the port before the storm became too strong. And yet they did not suspect that they were being watched from under the water. Something grabbed the bottom of the ship and began to pull it down quickly. In just a few seconds, the ship, with everyone on board, disappeared into the dark abyss. Morning came. The storm had already passed, but the sea was not calm. And yet, life in the depths of the ocean returned to its usual course. A flock of killer whales hunts at a depth of several meters from the seabed. One of them felt an unusual smell coming from the bottom and fell a little behind the group. But as soon as she got close to the source of the smell, a claw the size of the killer whale itself poked out of the sand and grabbed her. Kit tried to resist, but the forces were not equal. Soon, the owner of the claw emerged from under the sandy bottom, a crab of colossal size, whose shell was comparable in width to the length of a giant container ship. At the same time, its claws differed in size. The right one was slightly smaller than the crab itself, and the left one was very tiny. And it was with his left hand that he held the captured killer whale, which he was already bringing to his mouth. But before the crab could enjoy its prey, it felt a strong blow from behind. Something massive crashed into him. Startled, the hunter accidentally released his grip, and the killer whale took advantage of the opportunity to escape. The crab, recovering quickly, wanted to return its rightful prey, but it managed to escape to its relatives. Furious, he turned around to find out who dared to disrupt his breakfast. And the first thing that caught his eye was a huge boulder thrown at him, lying at his feet. Then the crab looked up and was amazed at what he saw. In front of him stood a huge, lanky creature with 3 legs and 2 four-fingered hands clenched into fists. Blue-head tentacles grew on its head, which contrasted with the pink skin of the creature. This creature was a giant kraken.
Sorry to interrupt breakfast. I am Agatha, Crown Princess of the Kraken Kingdom and Protector of the Pacific Ocean. And you are a border trespasser who hunts outside his territory and hopes that no one will notice. Alas, your calculation was not justified.
As she spoke and slowly approached the crab, it stood in place and watched her.
So you broke the law, and now as punishment I have to rip off your big claw. I know it's cruel, but trust me, it's not the worst. If it were my mom, she would have killed you without a second thought. So you're very lucky I'm giving you life, and in return I only ask for 1 claw. But how I get it depends on you. We can do the right thing, that is, you don't resist, and I almost painlessly separate her from the body, or in a bad way we start fighting and I pull off the claw by force. The choice is yours.
There was a deathly silence after these words. But it didn't last long, because soon the crab launched an attack, aiming its huge claw at Agatha's leg. But she managed to react and wrapped her arms around her in time. And with a calm expression on her face, she said,
So you chose the second option, okay.
The crab made several jerks, trying to free itself from the kraken's grip, but it did not succeed. Suddenly, Agatha herself began to jerk her claw sharply from side to side, after which she abruptly turned it up, instantly pulling it out. Thus, she deprived the crab of its only weapon. After that, she threw the limb aside and, swimming up to the crab from behind, grabbed its legs. Then Agatha began to spin in place, simultaneously rotating her opponent and, having gained enough speed, sent the crab flying free. The throw was so strong that when he fell to the bottom, raising a huge cloud of sand around him, Agatha saw only a small cloud a couple of kilometers away. She looked in that direction for a few more seconds, trying to see at least something, but realizing the futility of this action, she said in a calm voice,
Well, you wanted it yourself.
After that, Agatha picked up a claw from the bottom and went home with a sense of accomplishment. It took a couple of hours to get to the Kraken Kingdom, and Agatha used that time to think about her traditional victory speech. Eventually, she reached an underwater canyon, at the bottom of which, far from human eyes, towered a majestic palace, comparable in size to a large metropolis. He stood on huge pillars resembling the tentacles of an octopus, and a blue color emanated from him. Agatha floated up to a massive round door, which, as she approached, changed the lighting from blue to pink, the same as Agatha's, and opened. Before swimming inside, Agatha stood at the entrance for a while and looked at her trophy, anticipating the admiration of people and her family. However, the longer she stared at the claw and imagined the agony the crab felt when she tore it off, the faster the smile slipped from her face. As a result, there was no trace of her former enthusiasm, and it was replaced by a sense of shame and regret for what she had done. But the warrior princess managed to pull herself together and, taking a deep breath, made a heroic expression and floated into the opened entrance to the huge and shining main hall, decorated on all sides with frescoes depicting her mother. Despite all the beauty and grandeur of this place, for Agatha, who had lived here all her life, it was perceived as an ordinary part of the background.
Aggie, you're back.
Someone said in a joyful female voice. Agatha turned her head in the direction of the voice. Another giant kraken was floating towards her from the hallway. Like Agatha, she had 3 legs, but she was a head shorter, her skin color was orange, and her head tentacles were red. And unlike Agatha's tentacles, they were shorter and thicker. In addition, they stuck out carelessly in all directions, which made the hairstyle look like a dandelion. Agatha smiled at her tenderly and waved her hand in greeting.
Hi Jean, yes I'm back, and not empty-handed.
Agatha replied softly. Jean looked at the claw Agatha was clutching in her left armpit.
May I see it?
She asked with a smile.
Sure sis, here you go.
Agatha held out a claw to her sister.
Thanks.
Jean answered and took it with such care, as if it were made of porcelain. However, because of his weight, she almost dropped him. Agatha asked her sister.
Is it heavy?
But Jean decided not to show it and replied in the most casual tone.
Of course not. Although due to the fact that it is quite massive, it is difficult to grasp it.
Well, that's not surprising because her master is...
Don't tell me, I'll guess it myself. This.
A huge number of options flashed through her mind, but she still managed to find the right one.
It was a colossal crab catcher.
That's right, how did you find out?
Jean said with a smug smile.
Well, it's obvious. It's easy to tell it apart by the shape of its claws. And if you pay attention to these notches, then I can assume that it was a young male who had recently emerged from adolescence.
Agatha was overcome with longing and shame at these words, and her thoughts returned to the moments of the battle with the teenage crab, which she brutally mutilated, causing her face to drop sharply. But Jean, noticing this, thought that her sister was disappointed by her incorrect answer and decided to check with her.
Aggie, did I make a mistake?
Agatha woke up from her thoughts and realized that Jean had taken her reaction to heart. So she decided to fix the situation.
No, you said it right.
Oh, come on. You know I won't be upset.
The sister replied with longing in her eyes. Agatha tried to calm her down again.
You don't have to be upset if you're not mistaken.
Jean sadly lowered her eyes.
You had such a look. Just like Mom's when I lost a sparring match to my cousin Aglaya.
Agatha understood how much Jean was worried at that moment, so she decided to support her sister. She put her hand on her shoulder and, gently stroking her, replied,
Hey, don't worry. Yes, the way you showed up at the sparring was not very good, but it's been at least 2 years since that day.
1 year, 10 months, 2 weeks and 3 days.
Jean said, looking up at her sister for a moment, then looked down again.
You see, it's been a long time, enough to stop thinking about it.
Agatha said it in an optimistic tone.
That's easy for you to say. You've never lost.
Why didn't I lose?
Agatha asked in surprise.
I've lost more than once.
Yes, and to whom?
Agatha took her hand off her sister's shoulder and scratched her head, trying to remember something that could confirm her words.
Okay, for example, Mom. I lost to her quite often in training fights, especially at your age.
No, it doesn't fit. It was a training session. I meant a real fight.
Is sparring with cousin considered a real fight?
Jean was about to reply, but not wanting to ignite an argument, she remained silent.
Listen to me.
Agatha said in a soothing tone.
Yes, you didn't manage to win. Yes, it's unpleasant. But you don't have to remember and regret it all the time. Life doesn't stand still. And you won't be able to move on if you keep dwelling on the past.
Her sister's words gave Jean hope, but she was still skeptical of Agatha's position.
Do you really think that? Or are you saying this to reassure me?
Agatha smiled tenderly and hugged her sister tightly. Jean reciprocated and hugged her too, not even noticing how she accidentally dropped the claw from her hands, which was slowly descending.
I really think so.
Agatha spoke in a half-whisper. This touching moment lasted for several seconds, until it was suddenly interrupted by a loud voice.
How sweet.
The sisters abruptly stopped hugging and simultaneously looked in the direction from which the voice came. At the entrance to the corridor stood a Kraken woman, a head taller than Agatha and 2 taller than Jean. She had 5 legs, her skin was a greenish-yellow color, and her head tentacles grew almost vertically upwards, giving her a majestic appearance. This image was complemented by a crown and a large scepter, which she held in her right hand. She stared at them intently. There was strength, seriousness, and a slight pretentiousness in her gaze.
Why did you stop? Go on, pretend I'm not here.
She said with forced condescension in her voice.
Hello to you too, Mom.
Agatha replied, anticipating her ill intentions. The queen said nothing and began to approach the girls slowly and gracefully.
Jean, can I ask you something?
A slight fright was reflected on Jean's face, and she replied softly.
Of course, Mom.
Do you understand my speech?
What?
Jean asked in surprise.
Do you understand my speech?
The queen repeated in a more threatening tone.
Yes.
Jean replied with obvious fear in her voice.
Do you suffer from amnesia?
What? No.
Great.
The queen said with satisfaction.
So do you remember why I sent you here?
I remember.
She said, sounding ashamed and worried. Agatha saw this and tried to defuse the situation.
Mom, I found out what kind of monster is terrorizing killer whales.
But she didn't have time to finish when her mother suddenly cut her off.
Not now, Agatha.
Agatha immediately retreated, and the queen continued her conversation with Jean.
So, please tell me, why did I send you?
So that I can invite Agatha to the throne room.
Well done for remembering. Did you do what I asked you to do?
No.
She said softly and lowered her head.
Speak up, and look at me, not at the floor.
The queen said threateningly.
No.
She raised her voice slightly and looked into her mother's eyes.
Why?
I wanted to tell her, but first we greeted each other, then we started talking about the crab, and then our conversation started moving in a different direction, and we went too far to stop.
Realizing that her daughter had so easily forgotten about her order, the queen was beside herself with rage and asked with undisguised malice in her voice.
What kind of crab?
The colossal crab catcher. He was the one who hunted killer whales. I've been trying to tell you.
Agatha intervened, trying to defuse the situation. And it turned out that her words were able to cool the queen's short temper.
Well, I hope you showed him who's in charge of the sea.
Mom said with barely concealed satisfaction.
Yes, I brought his claw.
Agatha replied cheerfully.
A claw? This is wonderful. Aggie, where is she?
The queen exclaimed. Jean suddenly remembered that she had dropped it when hugging Agatha. She abruptly floated to the far end of the corridor to pick him up from the floor, and just as quickly returned, handing him to his mother.
Here she is.
The queen took it with her free hand and examined it carefully from all sides.
Yes, it's a worthy trophy.
She said and looked proudly at Agatha, who responded with relief.
Thanks, Mom.
Sister, you're back.
Everyone turned towards the corridor, from where a tiny, slightly plump aquamarine kraken with blue head tentacles and 4 limbs floated towards them. There was a big smile on his face, and simplicity and kindness shone in his eyes.
Hello, Brill. Yes, as you can see, I'm back.
Brill swam up to his giantess sister and hugged her tightly around the neck. Agatha hugged him with her right arm. After that, he looked at the claw in his mother's hands and said happily,
I see that the mission was a success.
Agatha wanted to reply, but she was interrupted again.
Of course it was successful. It couldn't be any other way with Agatha.
Jean said with a slight perplexity. The queen intervened in the conversation again.
Brill, what are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to wait in the throne room?
But Brill answered as casually as possible.
Yes, you did, but you've been gone too long, so I decided to check what happened.
The queen closed her eyes and, taking a deep breath, shook her head in response to her son's words, saying with displeasure,
Why are you all so wayward? You never do what is required of you.
Brill, realizing that the situation was taking a dangerous turn and that any careless word could cause Mom to flare up, decided to calm her down with a simple excuse.
Well, it's just that the whole kingdom is already assembled, and I thought you should hurry up.
Has everyone already gathered in the hall?
The queen looked at Brill in surprise.
Yes, Mom.
Okay, in that case, let's not detain the people.
She returned the claw to Agatha and, casting a stern glance at Jean, said,
And Jean, the next time I ask you to do something, try not to get distracted anymore.
Yes, Mom.
Jean replied with sadness on her face, but there was also relief in her tone from the fact that they had managed to resolve this conflict. The queen casually motioned for everyone to follow her and went out into the corridor. Agatha put her hand on her sister's shoulder as a sign of support and followed her mother. Brill swam up to Jean and asked,
What did you do?
Jean irritably waved away her older brother's words and, with sadness on her face, went after Agatha. Brill looked at his sister in bewilderment and asked in an uncomprehending tone,
Did I say something wrong?
But, having not heard the answer to the question, he quickly went to catch up with his family. They briefly floated along a wide corridor towards the throne room, at the entrance to which stands another kraken man with brown skin, long and thick head tentacles of dark brown color, as well as with 2 short appendages just above the mouth, resembling a mustache. He was staring at the ceiling, arms crossed over his chest, and thinking about something, not even noticing how the queen and the children were approaching him, which caused her slight bewilderment.
Harold, am I bothering you?
The queen asked. He turned abruptly in her direction and instantly put aside all his thoughts.
Queen Sadia, I'm sorry, I didn't see you. I was thinking of a new recipe for royal biscuits to make it even more tender.
He replied with the utmost politeness. After that, his gaze fell on Agatha, and he greeted her with the same politeness and a wide smile.
Agatha, you're back, I'm glad to see you.
Thank you, Uncle Harold. I'm glad to see you too.
Agatha replied amiably, but her mother again unceremoniously intervened in the conversation.
Why aren't you in the throne room?
Oh, yes, I completely forgot.
Harold was a little confused.
Your Highness, I'm here to warn you that Julia will be a little late.
What do you mean, a little late?
Sadia asked with obvious bewilderment.
You see, unforeseen circumstances have arisen, which she could not influence and could not ignore.
Harold,
Sadia exclaimed, tired of his lengthy introduction.
speak plainly.
Harold looked at the children standing behind the queen, hoping that they would intervene, but they did not. Therefore, he still found the strength to say everything as it is.
She went to the bathroom.
Being the queen of the Pacific Ocean, Cydia was able to assess any information sensibly, but this answer could confuse even her, so she asked Harold again.
To the bathroom?
Yes, Your Highness.
Harold replied calmly. Cydia was embarrassed.
So hurry her up.
I'm sorry, but unfortunately, I can't help you in any way.
You can.
Said Cydia.
Because you are her husband.
You've noticed this fact well. However, these are natural processes that I am unable to influence. Besides, Julia is pregnant, and rushing her can only lead to stress. And stress in her position can negatively affect the child.
These words puzzled not only the queen, but also her children.
Yes, it is a difficult situation.
Brill commented.
Maybe we can wait for her.
Agatha said, but Cydia didn't approve of her suggestion.
And make people wait? No, that won't do.
Harold intervened.
Then what do you suggest?
We'll start without her, and when she finishes her
She coughed slightly.
business, she can join us later.
Her suggestion confused everyone, and especially Jean, who protested against it.
No, we can't do that to Aunt Julia. It would be disrespectful to her.
But Cydia responded sharply to her displeasure.
Really? Would it be respectful to keep people waiting?
Jean was about to answer, but stopped at the last moment, as she was afraid that she might accidentally ignite a new argument with her mother. Cydia took her silence as a sign of agreement with her position and continued.
Well, since we have been able to resolve this issue, we can finally come out to the people.
The queen did not hesitate to enter the throne room, which was a spacious circular room with a huge throne in the center and several large jellyfish-shaped lamps floating on different sides of the hall and illuminating it with almost daylight. Thousands of ordinary kraken of all shapes and colors, from brown to pink, swam synchronously around the throne, clockwise. All of them, young and old, were eagerly awaiting the arrival of the royal family, and especially Agatha, for whom they had been summoned here. Queen Cydia was the first to enter the hall, followed by Princess Jean, Prince Brill and Count Harold. Their arrival was accompanied by a loud ovation, which continued until Cydia sat on the throne and motioned for them to stop, after which the crowd immediately fell silent.
My dear subjects,
Cydia said loudly.
I am so glad that you were able to take your mind off your business and come here. Unfortunately, my sister will not be able to attend today due to important state matters.
During the performance, Agatha stood in the hallway and waited for her turn. Even though she was no longer on a mission, she still had a feeling of anxiety that she couldn't get rid of. And it's not that she's afraid to speak in front of people. Not at all. Agatha has been fighting since she was a teenager and has given speeches hundreds of times. She knows how to behave and how to present a story correctly. And that's why everyone loves her. She's a real hero. A warrior princess who stands guard day and night and is ready to fight anyone without fear or reproach, even a terrible monster. And besides, he has unsurpassed storytelling skills that any real estate agent would envy. She can talk for hours about another victory over a monster, and no one will even dare to yawn. Everyone adores her and is looking forward to her new story. Everyone except Agatha herself. This image of the great heroine, which is promoted by the Royal Ministry of Information, which is completely subordinate to her mother, is nothing more than a simple and memorable symbol, which, as it often happens, does not correspond to reality. Agatha, from the point of view of her relatives in society, and Agatha in reality are completely different concepts that do not fit together, but at the same time get along in one person. She is a princess who hates royal ceremonies, an unsurpassed storyteller who prefers a quiet walk in the depths of the ocean to hours of speeches and noisy companies of the nobility. She is a great warrior who prefers talking to fighting. And how does Agatha manage to be like this without going crazy? That's a good question she's been asking herself for years. But the explanation is quite simple. Everyone knows that the great white shark should not be kept in captivity, as its respiratory system needs constant movement. And if the shark stops, it won't be able to breathe and will die. That's why she's always on the move. Agatha is a white shark. She never stands still, and her days are almost always filled with events, royal meetings, socializing with her family, or completing missions. Agatha always has something to occupy herself and her mind with. Therefore, she does not think about the contradictions that come together in her. But it doesn't always happen that way. In rare moments of peace, they make themselves felt, which makes her feel sad and anxious, just like now, while she listens to her mom's speech. At such moments, Agatha has an irresistible desire to drop all this and escape as far away from here as possible. Somewhere where there are no endless battles with monsters, where there are no constant demands to meet standards, and where her mom is not around. But Agatha has nowhere to run. The ocean is big, but not so big that you can hide from your mom in it. Besides, she has no one to run with. Although she likes silence, but she doesn't like being alone. She needs someone who is ready to be with her and support her in a difficult moment. But there is no one in the ocean to whom she could show her different nature, which is not hidden behind the splendor of propaganda and idealism. And, most likely, it never will be. Therefore, Agatha simply ignores such thoughts, not giving them their due, and silently continues to fulfill her duties and be a symbol that ignites a flame in the hearts of her relatives and subjects. A lighthouse should shine brightly to show the way, no matter how its keeper feels.
So, people, I am proud to inform you that your princess has successfully returned from her next assignment. So, welcome the strongest warrior of the Pacific Ocean and your future queen, Agatha.
Agatha knew that this was the signal for her exit, so she took control of her emotions, took a deep breath and said softly.
It started.
After that, with a wide smile, she sailed into the throne room, showing everyone her trophy. The crowd fell into euphoria. They loudly greeted their princess, loudly chanting her name. Several kraken swam out of the crowd with a huge wreath of colored algae to place it on Agatha's head. She accepted this gift and addressed the people.
Thank you to all of you. It is a great honor for me to be your protector. I want you to know that everything I do is solely for your sake.
The echo of the applause and cheers after these words was such that Agatha's ears began to ring. But she didn't show it and asked the crowd.
Well, are you ready to hear my story?
The crowd unanimously shouted, "Yes, Your Highness."
In that case, I won't delay any longer.
Agatha replied and began to tell them the story of how she went on a mission, tracked down the interloper and how she fought with him. Everyone in the audience listened to her story in one breath. Her story especially charmed Jean, who adored her sister's stories about her exploits. Even Queen Sadia, known for her exactingness, genuinely enjoyed the story. And at the moment when Agatha tore off the crab's claw, she was overwhelmed with pride for her daughter, and a motherly smile appeared on her face. However, when Agatha said that she had thrown her opponent instead of finishing him off, the smile faded from her face, and pride was replaced by disappointment. But she tried to hide it so as not to spoil the moment. In addition, everyone else, including Jean, Brill and Harold, was delighted with this ending, and when Agatha finished her story, the audience began to applaud her. After that, Sadia stood up from the throne and said with feigned joy,
Agatha, it's amazing, I liked your story.
Thank you, Mom.
Agatha replied modestly. The queen continued.
And so, people, I'm glad that you took the time to listen to my daughter, and now you can go back to your business. Have a nice day.
After these words, everyone began to disperse. Harold went about his business. Brill swam up to Agatha and said,
That was cool.
Thanks.
After which, he also left the throne room. Then, Jean swam up to her and also praised her for the story.
You're incredible.
But Agatha answered her modestly.
Come on, it wasn't that hard.
Sadia intervened in their conversation.
Jean, please take the claw to the trophy room, Agatha and I need to talk.
A slight frown appeared on Agatha's face, because she guessed what her mother wanted to talk to her about.
Of course.
Jean replied, and carefully took the claw in both hands. She was about to sail away when Agatha asked her.
You remember the password to my vault, right?
I remember 300,623.
Jean answered her, after which she left the throne room. Sadia sat on the throne and, looking sternly at Agatha, she said,
Well, am I going to start or are you?
Agatha pretended not to understand what she was talking about.
Start what?
But the queen couldn't be fooled that easily.
Don't pretend, Agatha. You know exactly what I mean. Or rather, about whom.
You mean the crab?
Agatha replied shyly.
Exactly.
There was a deathly silence for a few seconds, but Sadia interrupted her.
Come on, tell me. I have a lot of things to do today.
What am I supposed to say?
Agatha replied casually.
Tell me why you didn't kill him. I thought we agreed that time that you wouldn't let your opponent go alive anymore.
Agatha wanted to justify herself.
Well, I didn't let him go but threw him into the distance.
Agatha, don't play with me.
The queen said sternly.
I'm sorry, Mom, but I don't understand what I did wrong.
Don't you understand?
The Cydia grinned.
Well, you know that the Kraken will always answer the call and eliminates anyone who decides to challenge the balance in the ocean.
Agatha replied mockingly.
It is unlikely that one crab can upset the balance of the ocean.
Really?
Said Cydia.
He ate several schools of killer whales. And this, in your opinion, is not a violation of the balance?
Agatha was outraged by her mother's words and said,
Well, you know, he's not a shrimp, he's a predator. He needs a lot of food. And it's not his fault that because of the people where he comes from, almost all of his loot has ended. I've been there, and I know what I'm talking about. Giant crabs are literally eating each other. So I'm sorry, Mom, but I can't kill an animal that doesn't know morals and just wants to survive.
Queen took a deep breath and replied to her.
In your opinion, tearing off his claw was the best idea? You've disabled him, and when he returns to his form, he'll be eaten alive. In my opinion, it's even worse than if you just put him out of his misery.
Agatha didn't know what to say to her, so she decided to end the discussion and silently headed for the exit. Cydia continued talking after her.
You can run away all you want, but when you become the queen, you'll realize that I was right.
Jean arrived at the trophy room, which was a circular room similar to the throne room, but twice as large and with much less bright lighting. There was so little light that Jean's skin glistened slightly. Huge steel doors from the trophy vaults stuck out from the walls of the hall from top to bottom. Above the doors were glowing murals depicting their previous owners. Jean floated up to the door with Agatha's fresco, and there was a large combination lock in the middle of the door. Jean entered the code and the door opened automatically. Blue light and cold water emanated from it, as the vault contained body parts of defeated monsters that needed to be kept from rotting. But Jean hardly noticed the temperature change, as all her attention was focused on the contents of the vault. There were dozens of trophies that Agatha had shown off after every mission over the years and that Jean remembered by heart. The horns of the devil whale that Agatha had killed 3 years ago, the flashlight of the terrible anglerfish that she had captured a year ago, and many others. And now the claw of a giant crab trap has been added to this collection. Jean carefully placed the claw on a pre-prepared stand. After that, she turned around several times and, making sure that no one was around, began to swim inside the vault, collecting various exhibits and imagining pictures of how she defeated various monsters and brought home parts of their bodies as trophies. Receiving the love of the people and the respect of the family, and especially the mother. Unlike her older sister, who had the status of a warrior and defender, Jean was much more suitable for the description of a classic princess. She attended social events, gave speeches to students at the Royal Academy, and conducted field trips for children. This work was ceremonial in nature and did not require any extra effort from her. The only thing required of her was to know the rules of royal etiquette and not deviate from them. Which wasn't a big problem for her, because unlike Agatha, famous for her informal communication style and frequent disregard for rules, Jean was more restrained and acted according to the rules. This, combined with her kindness and modesty, made her very popular with both the nobility and the common people. Although, Jean herself did not fully understand why. In her opinion, she did not possess the qualities worthy of a Kraken princess. She was not a great warrior like Agatha and did not have the charisma that her mother has. Her ability to act according to the rules was perceived by her as nothing more than just following the rules. And her modesty was just a mask, necessary in order to hide the feeling that was deep in her soul and which she did not want to tell anyone about: inferiority. Jean was a giant Kraken, the protector of the seas and their inhabitants. But all her adult life, she's been doing anything but that. Jean considered herself a black gull against the background of Agatha and her mother and wanted to show them and herself that her time had come. But her insecurity and fear hindered her. The feeling that was supposed to protect her was holding her back, and there was nothing she could do about it. The fear intensified when she lost a sparring match to her cousin. And her hopes of proving herself became even more illusory. Every night she remembers that failure, and a small voice in her head tells her, "This is the end. You had a chance, and you missed it." The only thing left for her is to come to the trophy room and open Agatha's vault unnoticed by everyone, imagining that all is not lost yet, that she is the same as her sister. She felt better in this fantasy world than in reality. She was truly happy playing with the remains of long-defeated creatures. Because she saw in them what she so lacks: strength and confidence, which are preserved in these trophies from Agatha. This feeling is comparable to how, during a serious illness, a slight relaxation occurs, and you begin to feel your body being filled with strength. But, as with the disease, this feeling cannot last forever.
You know, I'm not a psychologist, but in my opinion, playing with frozen dead meat is a little abnormal.
Startled, Jean abruptly threw one of the trophies back and turned around. In the passage, leaning with his right side against the wall, stood a giant kraken a head taller than Agatha, but half a head shorter than Sadia. She had 4 legs, her body was rounded, her skin color was pale purple, and her head tentacles were dark purple and laid to the right. She had a strange expression on her face, somewhere between surprise and joy. She hadn't expected to see something like this, but it gave her genuine pleasure. Jean quickly swam out of the vault and greeted with a nervous smile.
Aunt Julia, hello. What are you doing here?
Julia looked at her niece with a sarcastic look and replied,
I was just passing by and suddenly felt a sharp chill coming from this room, and decided to check if everything was in order. The question is, what were you doing in Agatha's vault and why were you dancing with her trophies?
Dancing?
Jean said.
No, you misunderstood. Mom asked me to take Agatha's trophy to the vault while she was talking to her. I brought it and decided to check if everything was in order with the other trophies. And then you never know, suddenly the parasites started.
Aunt Julia asked in surprise.
Wait, did you say, carry the trophy? So Agatha has already told the story?
Yes.
Great, but why didn't they wait for me?
Julia asked indignantly.
Mom said that you can't keep people waiting and that you will come later.
Julia said unhappily.
Sadia, you won't even let me go to the bathroom in peace.
Don't worry, Aunt. Agatha will tell you everything separately later. Consider yourself an VIP.
Julia laughed at these words and said,
If we assume that a VIP is someone who sits in a castle all day and does nothing, then apparently it is. Okay, maybe you can show me whose paw, claw, or tentacle she brought this time.
Jean replied in a slightly upbeat tone.
A claw this time.
She pointed it out to her aunt, and Julia swam over to her and looked at her carefully. At the same time, Agatha was floating down the corridor, unhappy with the conversation with her mother. But her thoughts were interrupted by a slight chill coming from the trophy room. She decided to check what was going on and, swimming up to her, heard Aunt Julia's voice.
Is that a giant rock crab?
No.
Replied Jean.
It's a colossal crab catcher.
Oh, I see.
Jean looked at Agatha's entire collection again and turned uncertainly to Julia.
Aunt, may I ask you something?
What's the question? Of course you can.
Jean was a little nervous, but she managed to gather her strength.
Have you ever felt that your life is not going the way you want it to?
Agatha, who was standing outside the entrance, understood that this was a private conversation that she should not eavesdrop on. But her sister's question aroused her genuine interest, and in the end, curiosity got the better of her. Julia thought about her niece's question for a moment before answering.
It depends on what period of life you choose, because with age our views change, and what seemed wrong before will become self-evident in a few years. For example, I remember that it took me a long time to learn how to go potty training. So when my mom made me do it, of course I was unhappy and thought she was wrong. But if I look at it now, I realize that I was the one who was wrong. But I admit that Mom could have been more gentle with me.
Yes.
Jean said awkwardly with a slight disgust on her face.
When about day 4 you failed on your first mission and were no longer allowed to fight monsters, did you feel unfair?
Of course.
Aunt replied sadly.
I still remember that day. The disgruntled whispers of the citizens, the sad faces of Dad and Sadia, as well as the disappointed look of Mom.
And you didn't try to fix it?
What for?
How? What for?
Jean exclaimed.
To live up to her name.
Clearing a name is a vague concept. Even if I were given a second chance and killed 1,000 monsters, it wouldn't wash away the shame of the first failure.
Julia said with sad sarcasm. Jean resolutely responded to her aunt's words.
But it was also a mistake to leave everything as it is. You had to fight to try to regain your respect.
Julia smiled and looked at her niece with a warm look.
I'm sure if you were in my place, you would do just that.
These words made Jean feel slightly embarrassed.
No, what are you saying? I'm not like that at all.
No, you're like that. You're like coral. You look fragile and delicate, but you're actually as tough as the shell of an iron turtle.
From embarrassment, Jean's face turned slightly blue due to the rush of blue blood. She replied in the most modest manner possible.
You can say that about anyone, but definitely not about me.
Julia laughed out loud at these words, completely escaping from her depressing thoughts, and put her hand on Jean's shoulder.
Listen, my starfish, you're young and you're not completely sure of yourself yet. But time will pass and you'll see how amazing you are.
Jean looked at Agatha's collection again and asked thoughtfully.
How long can it take?
This will happen before you grow a fourth leg.
The ant replied with a smile. Jean cheered up noticeably, but there was doubt in her eyes about this. Julia looked into the open storage and asked.
Well, can we close this refrigerator or are we going to wait until everything starts to deteriorate?
Jean nodded approvingly and quietly closed the door. After that, they both headed for the exit. Agatha, who had been standing at the entrance all this time, heard their approach and used camouflage, becoming almost invisible. After that, my aunt and sister came out into the hall and began discussing their future plans for the day.
Well, Jean, where are we going?
I do not know. Where were you sailing to before you entered the trophy room?
I sailed to the throne room to listen to Agatha's story. But I think it's pointless to go there now.
That's right.
Jean replied, puzzled.
Well, then let's look for Agatha so that she can tell you a story.
That's a good idea.
Julia replied.
But you know, all these reflexive conversations take a lot of effort. I think we need to get some food first. What do you think?
Well, I don't mind a little snack.
Jean answered hesitantly.
I don't mind a big snack.
Julia added with a smile, after which they both disappeared around the bend. Agatha took off her disguise, continuing to watch them from the other end of the corridor and pondering over what she had heard. From their conversation, she realized that Jean was experiencing deep inner feelings related to self-doubt and dissatisfaction with her life. Agatha realized that she couldn't go on like this anymore, and decided to help her sister at any cost. But she also knew that she couldn't do anything without her mother's approval. Sadia sat on her throne and, as befitted a queen, listened to the daily report on the affairs of the kingdom from the royal secretary, a young aquamarine powerfully built kraken named Paul. And, as often happened, the only reaction during his listening was a strong desire to fall asleep. However, Sadia, thanks to the royal self-control, successfully hid it from him.
Mom, can we talk?
Agatha asked as she entered the throne room. The queen did not answer immediately, as she was confused by Agatha's sudden appearance, as well as her overly polite tone. But she was able to quickly pull herself together and, taking control of her emotions, replied in an impassive tone.
Of course, daughter.
She motioned for the secretary to leave them alone. Paul curtsied and immediately left the throne room.
So, what did you want to talk about?
Agatha spoke in a slightly agitated tone.
I've been thinking about our recent conversation and realized something.
Sadia thought that her daughter had finally admitted the fallacy of her point of view, and that she had come to her to ask for forgiveness. From these thoughts, a satisfied smile appeared on the queen's face and she said with a slight complacency.
And what did you understand, Agatha?
I realized that I can't be the only defender of the Pacific Ocean.
The smile on the queen's face was replaced by bewilderment. She hadn't expected such an answer, and she didn't understand how Agatha had come to this conclusion.
What?
Agatha tried to explain.
You remember what you told me. This crab has devoured several schools of killer whales.
I remember, so what?
Sadia replied casually.
Do you remember how long it took me to find him?
Sadia replied with a puzzled look.
3 days.
Exactly.
Agatha exclaimed.
For 3 whole days, during which he continued to hunt. And who knows how many killer whales he still managed to eat.
Sadia asked.
So you're saying that you need an assistant?
That's right.
The queen leaned on the throne and began to ponder her daughter's proposal with a thoughtful look, after which she replied.
I'm sorry, Agatha, I'd love to help you, but I can't leave the kingdom unattended.
Agatha bowed to her and said awkwardly.
Mom, I love and respect you very much, but I didn't mean you.
Who is it, Julia?
Sadia asked with genuine confusion.
No, I meant Jean.
Sadia looked away and began to think, unconsciously twisting the fingers of her right hand. After a few seconds, she replied.
I think that Jean is still too young to talk about it.
Young.
Agatha asked in perplexity.
She's already 16, which is more than I was when I went on my first independent mission.
The queen steepled her fingers and replied with undisguised confidence.
I was not talking about her age, but about her spiritual state.
Agatha looked at her questioningly.
Spiritual state? What does that even mean?
It means exactly what it means.
Agatha, still not understanding the meaning of these words, spread her hands questioningly. Cydia, realizing that she would have to explain her position, sighed in disappointment and began to explain.
You see,
She said it like she was explaining something to a kid.
Jean is a very good girl. She is smart, hardworking, and executive, and although she sometimes makes mistakes, I still appreciate and love her. But even though you correctly noted that she is already 16, she is still a child at heart. A sweet and naive child who is not ready to fight monsters yet. And before you tell me that you were the same when you were her age, I'll tell you in advance that you weren't. When you were 16, you were much more mature than Jean. As an analogy, imagine that you are a coral reef, Jean is a sea sponge, and the monsters are a ship. When a ship hits a reef, it sinks, and if it hits a sea sponge, it crushes it.
But I wasn't born a coral reef.
Agatha objected, putting the last two words in quotation marks.
I became what I am thanks to years of hard work. I fought, gained experience, got better, and eventually I was able to reach my potential. And how will Jean reveal hers if she stays in the kingdom all the time and won't be able to try her hand in practice?
She has already shown her strength in practice and, as for me, has not lived up to expectations.
The queen said coolly.
Are you talking about sparring with Aglaya?
Exactly.
Come on, Mom. It wasn't like it was a real fight.
Any fight, friendly or not, is always real.
The Cydia replied sternly. Agatha became desperate and decided to use the last argument.
And now, because of one failure, she has to stay in the palace for the rest of her life?
Well, why for the rest of your life? Maybe in 2 years I will give her the opportunity to prove herself. In the meantime, let him enjoy the delights of serene life.
Cydia said this with maximum ease, which displeased Agatha. But she didn't show it and, unable to find the right words, she remained silent.
Well, since we've come to an agreement, I think we can end our conversation here.
The queen said. Agatha bit her lower lip and replied sullenly.
I think so.
Great, have a nice day, Agatha.
But Agatha did not answer and hurriedly left the throne room. Her blood was boiling with rage, and the urge to swear was so strong that if she lingered for a few more seconds, all her thoughts could spill out. She was devastated, and there was only one question in her head.
Why did I go to her? What was the point if I knew for sure that she would refuse?
But Agatha didn't know the answer, and she didn't try to find it, because her head was already too full of depressing thoughts that had accumulated over the day. She decided to relax a little to take her mind off these thoughts. Therefore, Agatha quickly headed to the main entrance and left the palace as soon as the doors opened. Although this place was her home, for Agatha, the royal palace, with its graceful halls and numerous decorations, always seemed too pretentious and oppressive. Therefore, for calm thoughts or emotional relief, she usually chose another place that was no less familiar to her. And that's where she was heading. Fortunately, this place was not far away. As soon as Agatha left the underwater canyon, she turned left, and in front of her, in the faint underwater lighting, she could see a huge forest of algae, where she headed, carefully making her way through this marine forest so as not to get entangled in them. Soon, a spacious circular area appeared in front of her, completely cleared of algae. In the very center there was a makeshift balancing swing, as long as Agatha's leg. In the right corner there was a small shelter made of huge boulders, which could easily accommodate a small flock of whales, and in the left corner there was a round metal gate for playing a clash game in which each team must throw a ball into the gate of someone else's team. Normally, the gate was no more than 5 meters in diameter, but this gate was twice that size. This was done for a reason, because this gate, like the entire playground, was created taking into account the size of a giant kraken. This place was created by Agatha's father, after she and Jean, when they were still very young, accidentally got entangled in a forest of algae while playing catch-up. They dangled helplessly in the seaweed for several hours, like two fish caught in a net, until their parents found and freed them. Their father decided that they needed a safe area outside the royal palace, and he, along with a couple dozen servants and Aunt Julia, was able to create it. Over the years, she, Jean, Brill, and their father came here and spent their days playing and having fun. But when Agatha turned 12 and her mother started teaching her the art of the warrior, she had almost no time left to visit the playground. And when her father tragically died trying to pull a shoal of herring from the nets and as a result accidentally got under the propeller of the ship, they stopped visiting her altogether. Perhaps this playground would have been completely overgrown with algae if Agatha hadn't accidentally stumbled upon it 3 years ago. She had secretly put the playground in order, and now it looked as if all those years had simply not happened, and her father was still alive and watching over its safety. The reason for her scrupulous attitude towards this place was that Agatha felt an inner attachment to it. Even more than the palace, since her mother announced the reconstruction of the entire interior every 3 or 4 years, and sometimes the changes were so global that the same room could not be recognized after the next renovation. The lack of consistency in the environment leads to a lack of unity in the image of the past and, as a result, to weak attachment, since it is difficult for the brain to cling to any details. But that wasn't the case in this case. It seems that time has stopped here. It was so cozy and peaceful here that Agatha often came here to cope with her inner feelings and for a few minutes to be transported back to a time when everything was simple and easy. This playground was like a quiet harbor where ships come in to wait out a storm. But not this time. Agatha swam randomly from side to side until her gaze fell on the swing, which she and Jean loved to ride. She carefully sat down on the right edge, the one on which she most often swung, and began to lift herself with 3 legs, pretending to swing. But there was no relief. On the contrary, Agatha felt even more anxious. She remembered that once, many years ago, when she and Jean were riding on this swing, Jean told her that when she grows up, she will become the strongest warrior of the Pacific Ocean. To which the young Agatha replied with childish naivety that when she grows up, she will become the strongest warrior of the 7 seas. Although this memory didn't make any bad sense in itself, it still made Agatha's mouth feel bitter. Because it reminded her of Jean's conversation with Aunt Julia and, of course, of her own conversations with her mother. Mother's voice echoed in her head.
She has already shown her strength in practice and, as for me, has not lived up to expectations. You can run away as much as you want, but when you become a queen, you will realize that I was right.
Agatha, her face contorted with anger, abruptly jumped off the swing and immediately left the playground, realizing that this time she would not be able to calm down here. But she didn't want to go back either, so she decided that she should surf the dark expanses of the ocean a little to rest. Agatha turned back one last time, casting a sad glance at the playground, and then left the place. Her restless mind demanded movement, and she obeyed it, floating aimlessly in an ocean that made Agatha seem like a small pink dot. From time to time, other marine life swam around her: fish, jellyfish, dolphins. But she didn't notice them. All her thoughts were consumed by emptiness and despair. She has fought and defeated the most dangerous creatures in the ocean, but she is unable to influence her mother's opinion. It gave her a feeling of helplessness that shrouded her consciousness in a thick fog. This fog was so thick that she lost the sense of time and distance. Having swum almost 100 kilometers in 3 hours, Agatha did not even notice it. Suddenly, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something that was different from the usual marine background. Some kind of incomprehensible silhouette on the seabed a couple of dozen meters away from her. This attracted her attention, and Agatha, putting aside all thoughts, went to this object. He was at the entrance to a giant underwater gorge, comparable in size to the canyon in which the Kraken Kingdom was located. It was so big that it covered her entire field of vision, but Agatha wasn't looking at it. The only thing that caught her attention was that shiny object at his entrance. She was rapidly approaching him, but she still couldn't figure out what it was. Finally, Agatha swam close to the gorge and was shocked by what she saw. There was a ship lying at the bottom, or rather, what was left of it. She didn't realize it right away because it was torn in 2 along the deck. Judging by the size and shape of the wreckage, it was a fishing trawler. However, it wasn't the ship itself that worried her more, but its condition. The 2 parts matched each other symmetrically, but this was hardly the work of humans, since although they pollute the oceans with all sorts of junk, Agatha knew that ships were not one of them. The possibility that this was due to a storm was also out of the question, because even the most powerful wave would not be able to do something like this. She had only one option left. It was the work of some kind of monster. The question is, which one? At first she thought about that crab, but almost immediately dismissed the thought. Since he was in a completely different part of the ocean, and judging by the fact that there were no algae, polyps, or even rust on the wreckage of the ship, the attack occurred within a few days. Therefore, Agatha decided that it was some other monster who decided to break one of the main rules, not to attack humans. Agatha straightened up and, squaring her shoulders, looked into the gorge. A premonition told her that this uninvited guest was hiding there. And her assumption was confirmed when she noticed the torn to shreds containers in which the caught fish were transported, which littered the bottom of the gorge. Agatha looked into the gorge again, realizing that somewhere in this corridor, dark as the Mariana Trench, work was waiting for her. According to the rules, she had to return home and tell her mother about the discovery, so that she would officially send her in search of the monster. But now there was no need for these formalities. Besides, Agatha did not want to cross paths with her mother again after everything that had happened between them. She intended to go to the gorge and do what she does best. And at that moment, while Agatha was thinking and had not fully made up her mind, the memory of her first mission crept into her head. About how her mother took her to the lair of the sea dragon, exactly like this gorge, and ordered her to go there and fight it alone. This memory was a spontaneous reminder of the past, but it took over her entire consciousness in a matter of seconds. A thought appeared in Agatha's head, consisting of only 2 words, so simple, but at the same time so ingenious that Agatha quietly said it out loud.
This is the way out.
A way out of the situation she got herself into, the situation her mother got her into. And not only her, but also Jean. This solution was in this gorge, and it was exactly what was supposed to solve all the problems. And from this feeling, a wide smile appeared on Agatha's face, and her eyes lit up with the fire of hope again. She immediately turned around and set off back to the Kraken Kingdom at full speed. The royal dining room, like the throne room, was a large circular room with a vaulted ceiling and suspended chandeliers. The only difference from the throne room was that in its center, instead of a throne, there was a large round green table. Around this table there were the same round chairs without backs, in the amount of 7 pieces. Jean and Julia were sitting on 2 of them, facing each other. In the middle stood Harold, who was actively arguing with his wife.
No, anything but that.
Harold's voice echoed, sounding so determined, as if a matter of global importance was being decided in this room.
You just can't, right?
Julia asked sarcastically, as if deliberately provoking him. Harold crossed his arms resentfully and condescendingly replied,
I can do it with my eyes closed and my hands tied behind my back, but I won't.
Julia rolled her eyes and replied with the intonation of a child who asks for sweets from his parents.
Come on, is it hard for you to please your wife? I'm not ordering, I'm asking.
To which Harold silently shook his head, not taking his stern gaze off her. Seeing her husband's principled attitude, Julia looked at Jean, who, with her hands on the table, was awkwardly twiddling her fingers, trying to occupy herself with something while her relatives could not come to an agreement. She didn't like family quarrels, but she didn't like being dragged into them even more. But that's exactly what Julia was going to do to convince her husband.
Jean.
Her aunt's voice sounded so loud that Jean jumped in her chair in surprise. She looked at Julia and asked anxiously,
What? Tell me, what do you think about this situation?
Jean's eyes began to frantically run around. She did not listen to their argument and did not know what to answer her. In the end, she decided to ask again.
What were you talking about? I listened a little.
Julia cast a disappointed glance at her niece and, taking a deep breath, was about to tell her the context. But Harold was suddenly ahead of her.
Your aunt wants me to make some coral crackers, but I refused because I know what harm they can do to the baby.
Julia objected to his words with displeasure.
From where you can know? Were you talking to her while I was sleeping? Or do you have a medical degree?
Harold grinned and stroked his mustache.
Well, you know, being a cook is kind of the same as being a doctor. After all, how will you cook if you don't know how food will affect body?
And how will a couple of crackers affect my body or the baby's body?
Harold replied.
Very seriously, corals are heavy food that does not carry any nutritional value. They're bad for you, but also for the baby.
Julia spread her hands in displeasure.
Of course, a couple of crackers are so harmful. Maybe not strong.
Jean finally intervened.
But still, it's there. And if you don't get anything from them, then it will make a difference for the unborn baby.
A smug smile appeared on Harold's face as he realized that he wasn't the only one holding the same point of view.
You see, Julia, Jean agrees with me. So no coral crackers until you give birth. After that, you can eat them at least every day. But for now, I will not allow putting our child's health in danger.
Then he straightened to his full height and soared over the table.
Well, I'm going to the kitchen. The classic sea cucumber cookies won't cook themselves.
After that, he cast a last glance of gratitude at Jean and left the dining room. Jean looked at her aunt, who, with a sad face, propped her head on her clenched fist. Jean decided to cheer her up a little.
Don't worry, Aunt. Uncle Harold is right. You'll have a chance to eat crackers later.
Julia looked at her niece blankly and sarcastically replied,
What makes you think I'm upset? On the contrary, I'm overjoyed because I'm going to enjoy my favorite sea cucumber cookies. And I don't care that he's already making me sick.
She had barely finished her sentence before Agatha floated into the dining room. Julia, seeing her, smiled and greeted her joyfully.
Hey, Aggie.
Hi, Aunt.
Agatha replied, waving at her and approaching the table. Julia said,
I'm sorry that I wasn't at your story.
but Agatha waved her hand and said with a smile.
It's okay, Aunt. You had a reason.
Julia smiled awkwardly, scratched her head, and replied sarcastically.
Yes, that's right.
There was an awkward silence in the dining room for a couple of seconds, but Jean interrupted it.
Well, since you're here, maybe you can tell Aunt your story.
Julia said,
Yes, tell me but without the gory details. You know I don't like that.
Agatha smiled slightly and replied,
Of course, Aunt, I'll tell you, but later. Right now, Jean and I have a very important matter.
Jean tilted her head to the right and looked questioningly at Agatha.
What business?
Agatha waved it off as if it meant nothing.
It's nothing complicated, just a routine exploration of the territory.
Jean said.
Why do you need me? You've always done it yourself.
Agatha was prepared for this question and came up with a plausible reason in advance.
Usually, yes, but I'm so tired today that I can't stand another 5 hours of swimming. But together, we could finish it in 2 hours.
Every word she said was so well played that Agatha herself was surprised at the plausibility of this performance. Years of public appearances have finally been put into practice.
Well, Jean, you agree.
I don't even know.
Jean stammered uncertainly.
My aunt and I wanted to have lunch.
Don't worry, I know how Harold likes to control everything and interfere with the work of his subordinates. By the time lunch is served, the ocean will be dry. So you can swim safely. I'll wait, and then we'll all eat together.
Jean looked at her aunt and then looked at Agatha.
Okay.
Agatha beamed with joy and said with a smile.
That's great, follow me.
Then she turned around and left the dining room in a matter of seconds. Jean reluctantly got up from the table and swam after her sister. Stopping at the entrance and looking at her aunt, who waved goodbye, she smiled slightly and left her. Jean was barely able to catch up with Agatha, who managed to swim to the entrance. They sailed out of the palace together and, having passed through the canyon and its powerful undercurrent, went to explore. Well, at least that's what Jean thought. Therefore, she carefully peered into the depths and watched every herring passing by them. Agatha didn't even look away. All her thoughts were connected with the plan she had developed while sailing home, and which consisted of several points. The first point is to get to the gorge. The second point is to pretend that she is surprised by the ship they found. Point 3 is to persuade Jean to go into the gorge and stay outside herself. Point 4. Wait until Jean returns with the trophy. And point 5. To solemnly return home with the trophy, show it to his mother, mentally wiping her nose and accepting apologies from her for her wrongdoing. Agatha almost smiled at the thought of the latter. But she understood that to do this, she had to go through the previous 4 points. And their success depended almost entirely on whether Jean could handle the monster. Her sister had all the abilities that Agatha had, as her mother had also trained her in the past. But she stopped when Jean lost a sparring match to her cousin. And considering that she never fought again, either before or after that, her fighting skills, as her mother would say, were at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. But despite this, Jean was still a giant kraken, the strongest creature in the ocean. And even such an unprepared and peaceful individual like her sister still remains a dangerous and powerful rival for anyone who dares to challenge her. The main thing is for Jean to be able to use her natural abilities correctly, and victory will be assured. Therefore, Agatha decided to have a preparatory conversation for her, disguised as simple chatter.
So far, everything is calm.
Agatha said, turning her head towards Jean. She replied,
That's for sure.
But we mustn't let our guard down, sis. A true warrior should always keep his eyes open to be prepared for the unexpected.
What kind of surprises?
Jean asked.
Any of them. You never know for sure you're swimming, and then a monster attacks from behind. You need to be careful, not only to look around, but also preferably behind your back.
Fortunately,
Jean said, smiling slightly.
as long as the two of us are here, no one will dare to attack us.
Agatha chuckled slightly and turned her head forward again.
The key word is, so far, we won't always be together. Therefore, you need to be prepared for everything.
Jean, with a slight disappointment in her voice, said,
Thanks for the advice, Aggie. But it's unlikely to be useful to me in the coming years.
Agatha saw the silhouette of the gorge in the distance and said with barely concealed anticipation.
Don't say what you don't know.
At the same time, she mentally crossed out the first point of the plan. Jean looked at her sister uncomprehendingly, as she did not quite understand what this was about. The sisters swam up to the gorge, and Jean saw that a strange object was lying at the entrance to it. She pointed her finger at him and said,
Agatha, look, there's something lying there. What's it?
Agatha looked where she was pointing, convincingly feigned surprise, and replied.
I do not know. Let's swim closer.
Agatha and Jean moved towards the wreckage. Swimming closer, surprise and shock appeared on Jean's face. Agatha also tried to reproduce these emotions, but, fearing that Jean would see a fake in them, she swam slightly behind her back. But Jean wasn't looking at her. All her attention was focused on this torn-apart ship, at the sight of which her emotions and thoughts were intertwined with each other, and she could not say anything intelligible. But in the end, she managed to somehow pull herself together and say,
Who did this?
There was no hint of rage or confidence in her voice. Only real fear and shock enveloped her entire consciousness. Even Agatha, who knew her sister very well, did not expect such a reaction. In the end, she answered her.
I don't know.
As soon as she finished her sentence, Jean turned around and walked away at full speed. Agatha hurriedly ran to catch up with her sister and called her back.
Jean, wait, where are you going?
Home. We need to tell Mom about this.
Agatha swam up to her in an instant, blocking her way, and tried to dissuade her.
Wait a minute. We need to think about it.
Jean replied sharply and worriedly.
Some monster tore the ship apart. What should I think about?
Agatha abruptly put her hands on Jean's shoulders and said in a soothing tone.
That is why we should not make sudden and rash decisions. In such a delicate situation, we should not give in to emotions. So take a deep breath and calm down.
Jean followed her sister's advice, and it really seemed to help her get her thoughts under control. She took a couple more deep breaths, after which Agatha released her. Agatha was pleased that she had managed to get the situation under control, and she was able to mentally cross out the second point of the plan. Now she needs to somehow convince Jean to go to the gorge. But Agatha hasn't figured out how to do it yet. Therefore, she decided to improvise.
And so, now we need to think about how we will proceed.
Well, I've already offered you the option of going to Mom and telling her about it.
Jean said.
Isn't that the most obvious option?
Agatha understood that arguments were needed to convince Jean, and she told her.
Okay, Jean, let's think logically. Some kind of monster attacked the ship, and most likely, judging by his condition, it happened recently, so whoever it was, he's somewhere nearby.
Jean, with incomprehension, said.
That's right.
Agatha continued.
That's why we don't have time for these formalities. By the time we get home, we'll tell Mom everything, and she'll officially give me the go-ahead to find him. The monster will leave and manage to sink several more ships. Time is a huge luxury that we don't have right now.
Jean scratched her head and looked at her sister, then she turned her head and looked at the wreckage of the ship.
You're right. Time is not on our side. But what do you suggest?
Agatha clenched her right hand into a fist and bent it.
We'll find him ourselves, without waiting for Mom's permission.
Jean's eyes widened in surprise and she straightened up abruptly.
What? Are the two of us going to look for a monster?
Agatha, raising an eyebrow slightly and smiling awkwardly.
Yes.
Jean rubbed her eyes with her fingers and replied.
That is, just the two of us. Including me?
Yes.
Agatha said more loudly.
But.
Jean said.
But, Mother did not allow me to participate in the mission. She's not going to be happy about it.
Agatha grabbed her sister's hand and, barely able to contain her fatigue from this conversation, said to her.
Listen to me again. The monster is somewhere nearby, and it has violated one of the main laws of the ocean. And if we don't stop him, he can do it again and then again and again. And this, in turn, will attract people's attention. We don't need that, right?
No, no need.
Great.
Agatha released Jean.
So, what do we need to do?
Find the monster as soon as possible. But
Jean paused and continued.
But Mom will kill me if she finds out that I participated in the monster hunt without her knowledge.
Agatha made a soothing gesture and said,
Don't worry about Mom. I'll take full responsibility.
Jean, in her usual manner, lowered her eyes and said,
You're sure? She will punish you severely. Besides, it might ruin your reputation.
Agatha casually waved those words away.
Don't worry about me. Mom won't do anything to hurt me. In the worst case scenario, he will scream. As for my reputation, you know I don't care about it.
Jean was silent for a while, trying to think about her sister's suggestion, but in the end she agreed with an approving nod.
Well, since we have solved this issue, we will return to the ship and inspect it.
The sisters swam together to the scene and began to inspect it. More precisely, Jean was doing the examination. Agatha was only pretending, as she wanted her sister to demonstrate her skills herself.
Agatha, come here.
Jean shouted to her, standing at the entrance to the gorge.
What is it?
Jean pointed with her finger at the empty containers in which the fish should have been lying.
Look, apparently, this vessel was a fishing vessel. Apparently, the monster smelled the fish and attacked him.
Agatha was pleased that her sister had so quickly established the connection between cause and effect, and, putting her hand on her shoulder, said,
Well done, but where is he now?
Jean said, looking thoughtfully at the containers.
Well, if you look at all this junk, you can see that it's lying around for a reason. The monster put everything he couldn't eat here. Containers, the hull of the ship. This is his dump, and his house.
Jean silently looked into the gorge. Agatha gave Jean a sisterly pat on the head.
You see, I would have been here for a long time without you.
Jean was slightly embarrassed and said,
Thanks, Aggie.
Agatha stopped patting her on the head and straightened up.
So now we have to explore the gorge. Let's do this. I go in from this entrance and you go in from the other one. We will sail to meet each other until we meet or until one of us meets a monster.
Wait, what?
We will sail to meet each other until we meet or until one of us meets a monster.
I understood that.
Agatha spread her hands.
Then what's the question?
I thought we'd go together, not alone.
Agatha tried to calm her down.
Jean, I understand you. It's scary for you to go alone, but there's no other way out. The gorge is not a cave. It has 2 entrances, and to trap the monster, we need to split up. Otherwise, he will leave.
Jean, terrified at the thought that she would have to go alone into the dark ravine in which the monster was sitting, said,
What if I meet him? What then?
Then you will fight him and defeat him.
How? I've never fought monsters. I even lost to my cousin.
Agatha covered her lips with her index finger and said in a low voice,
Don't scream, the monster can hear you.
Agatha slowly removed her finger, and Jean said shyly,
I'm sorry, but I can't do that.
Agatha closed her eyes and took a deep breath.
I understand you. I was also afraid on my first assignment. I didn't tell anyone because Mom forbade it, but like you, I refused to swim in the sea dragon cave and begged Mom to come with me.
Jean said in surprise.
That's not true.
No, it's true. I cried like a little girl, in truth it was, but I swam into the cave anyway and fought with him. Do you know why?
Why?
Because I remembered that it's my duty. I'm a kraken, and a kraken always responds to a call. Even if he's scared, this does not mean that the real kraken is not afraid of anything, not at all. Fear is not a curse, it is a protection. He protects us, but sometimes fear becomes too strong and prevents us from doing our duty. A real hero is not someone who is not afraid. No, only fools are not afraid of anything. The real hero is the one who controls his fear, and you can do it.
Jean was inspired by her sister's speech. These words acted on her like a sedative. But her thoughts about her weakness still remained stronger.
That's great, but I won't be able to defeat the monster if I meet him.
Agatha exclaimed.
Who told you that? You are a giant kraken, the strongest creature in the 7 seas, and your abilities are not even slightly weaker than mine. And before you say that you lost to Aglaia, I will answer in advance that she is also a giant kraken, just a little more prepared than you. Therefore, no matter which son of a fisherman is sitting there, you can handle him, baby.
What Agatha had just said to her was not just kind words, not just sisterly consolation. Not at all. For Jean, these words were like a cure for a disease that she had suffered from all her life. For her, These words were what she dreamed of hearing with every fiber of her soul. Jean felt an incredible surge of strength and confidence, which she had not felt either in her dream or during her stay in the safe with Agatha's trophies. Adrenaline was pumping through her blood, and the feeling of elation was so strong that she almost screamed for the whole neighborhood. But she pulled herself together in time, and instead, she silently hugged Agatha with all her might. Even though it wasn't the right time for this, both sisters understood that this was the only way to express all their feelings without unnecessary chatter. Agatha and Jean, despite their differences, were still sisters. And they understood each other without words and knew when to shut up and let their emotions run wild. They hugged for half a minute, after which, Jean released her sister and told her with a big smile.
Okay, I agree.
Great, Jean, I didn't doubt you.
Jean turned slightly blue with embarrassment. Agatha continued.
So my plan remains in force. I'm coming in from this entrance and you're coming in from the other one. We will sail to meet each other until we meet or until one of us meets a monster, okay?
Okay.
Jean answered and sailed upward, but Agatha called out to her.
Wait a minute.
Jean stopped and looked at her sister.
Before you swim into the gorge, a voice will be heard in your head telling you that you won't succeed, you better not swim there, and other nonsense. Don't listen to that voice. Close your eyes, count to 3 and keep swimming. Remember that I will swim towards you, and if anything happens, I will come to your aid.
Jean was glad to hear such words. For the first time that day, she finally felt that she could be sure that everything would be exactly as she was told.
I get it, thanks.
Jean was ready to leave, but Agatha held her back again.
Oh, by the way, one more thing. If you're unlucky enough to encounter a monster, you don't have to engage it right away. Talk to him, persuade him to give up. But if that doesn't help and it comes to a fight, try not to kill him.
Jean rolled her eyes slightly, as she was already impatient to get on the road, but nevertheless, she took her words into consideration.
Okay, Aggie, can I swim now?
Of course, Jean, I finished.
Jean left the place at full speed to escape before her sister remembered another piece of advice she would decide to give her. Agatha, in turn, watched Jean slowly rise up, and when she sailed over the top of the cliff, completely out of sight, Agatha finally mentally crossed out the third point of the plan. She sighed in relaxation and, dragging a large boulder to the entrance, lay down on it as on a sofa. Agatha was pleased, as the first half of her plan was successfully completed. But deep down, she was a little worried about her sister, as she had to do the hardest work. For a few seconds, she was overcome by a feeling of shame, which made her open her eyes for a moment and look into the gorge. But Agatha quickly suppressed this feeling and remained lying on the stone, hoping that Jean would not be too angry with her for this adventurous venture. Because, in her opinion, this risk and deception were worth it, and Jean will understand this when she brings her first trophy home and receives not only her mother's apologies and universal respect, but also her own storage in the trophy room. And although her plan was perfect from a theoretical point of view, it was based solely on whether Jean could defeat the monster that was sitting in the gorge. It couldn't be 100% guaranteed. But it was too late to think about it, so Agatha just hoped that her sister still had some basic fighting skills. Jean swam along the gorge and from time to time looked down, trying to see the monster from above, but it turned out to be an unsuccessful idea. To find the monster, she would have to go down into it. But Jean didn't mind, because now she could finally do what a giant kraken should do. The very idea that her life's dream was coming true right here and now was euphoric. But Jean understood that it was too early to relax. Eventually, after almost 15 minutes, she reached the opposite entrance to the gorge, which was just as impassable as the one at the other end. But Jean did not look at him, as her thoughts were preoccupied with a possible fight with the monster. She almost instantly floated inside, forgetting about her sister's advice. The gorge was wide enough for Jean to swim through it without hindrance. The only obstacles in her way were numerous underwater geysers of all shapes and sizes, from a couple of meters in height to almost the height of Jean herself. Another disadvantage was the pitch darkness. But this trouble was overcome thanks to her good eyesight, which allowed her to navigate the underwater depths, as well as light orange bioluminescence. Jean slowly moved deeper into the gorge, carefully avoiding each underwater geyser, listening carefully and peering into the darkness, as well as looking around, as Agatha advised her. But the further she swam, the more fear returned to her. With every meter she walked, all three of her hearts were beating harder and harder. And the voice that had haunted her all these years came back to her. Come back, run away from here, you can't do this. These thoughts reminded her of Agatha's advice to count to 3 when thinking about it. She stopped and looked around. After making sure she was alone, Jean closed her eyes, took a deep breath and said softly,
1, 2, 3.
After that, she opened her eyes, but from what she saw, she first thought that she was hallucinating. Right in front of her eyes, she saw the reflection of her face on a black reflective surface. It took Jean a moment to understand what it was and where it came from. It was only when she examined the surface on which her reflection was, that she realized with horror that right in front, a few centimeters from her face, there was someone's eye in which she saw her. Startled, Jean instantly jumped back several meters, hitting her back against an underwater geyser. She took a fighting stance and began examining the creature that had nearly given her a heart attack. In front of her stood a creature with black skin, as if it had just bathed in an oil bath, which had a humanoid body shape. A thin body, long three-toed legs, equally long, but at the same time massive five-fingered hands, somewhat resembling human ones, which it clenched into fists. And also a disproportionately large elongated head, on which almost all the place was occupied by huge oval-shaped green eyes, in the middle of which there were the same oval pupils in which Jean could see her glowing reflection. The creature stood and stared at her speechlessly, with a kind of frightening serenity in its huge eyes. Jean was amazed to the depths of her soul, while she herself did not fully understand what exactly. Either by his unusual appearance, or by his strange behavior, or by the fact that she can't remember a single creature like this. Or from all of it at once. Jean stood in a fighting stance and silently looked at him, and he looked at her. This staring game ended when Jean nevertheless decided to break the silence, saying with barely concealed fear,
"Stay where you are."
The monster was still standing there. Jean decided that since this creature had not attacked her when it had the opportunity and was not openly aggressive towards her, then it might have some sense and could negotiate with it. Jean straightened up and squared her shoulders to appear more imposing and said,
"Hello there, my name is Jean. I am the youngest daughter of Queen Cydia and the younger sister of Princess Agatha. You've probably heard of her."
The creature blinked for the first time, and Jean took it as a sign of approval.
"Look, whoever you are, you're obviously intelligent, which means you understand the reason I'm here."
The creature blinked a second time.
"You attacked the ship. Perhaps you had your reasons for this, but in any case you violated one of the main laws of the seas. Therefore, you must be punished. So, I'm sorry, but you're not leaving here unscathed."
The creature raised an eyebrow and looked questioningly at Jean.
"Don't be surprised, you knew there would be consequences. But you have a choice. I offer you two options. First of all, you're voluntarily letting me rip your paw off. You can choose which one, and then I'll let you go. And the second option."
Jean did not have time to finish her sentence, as in a matter of moments the monster swam up to her at full speed and hit her in the chest with great force. The impact was so strong that its inertia sent Jean flying back and, destroying the geyser behind her, flew another couple of dozen meters, after which she fell to the bottom, in an unnatural position, twisted in pain. If Jean had had a ribcage, it would have been shattered into many pieces. But fortunately, she wasn't there. But it didn't make her feel any better. Jean looked up with terrible pain, hugging her small body with her arms. In her entire life, she had never felt so much pain as she did now. She was terribly sick, but fortunately she didn't eat anything today, skipping lunch with her aunt. So she couldn't throw up. It was the only thing that comforted her. But the relief was short-lived. Jean felt the monster grab her leg with an iron grip. He grabbed her leg with both hands and started dragging her along the bottom. Jean abruptly raised her head, trying to resist, but it made her eyes go dark, and she almost fainted. She closed her eyes for a moment and shook her head to recover. But suddenly she felt a sharp jerk, from which she soared into the sky, and then just as abruptly her whole body crashed into another geyser. The monster threw her over himself and threw her into the geyser with all his might. But for Jean, everything happened so fast that she didn't even have time to figure out what was going on. Suddenly, the opponent swam up to her again and, grabbing her leg, threw her onto another geyser, which was also destroyed. Then he did it again, and again, and again. With each destroyed geyser, her pain doubled, her muscles cramped even more, and there was a loud ringing in her head, which she did not have time to get rid of, as it was interrupted by a new one when another geyser hit her head. As a result, when Jean weakened so much that her body stopped emitting light, the monster stood in the middle of the gorge and, grabbing her leg even tighter, began to spin her around. And, speeding up quite a bit, he released her. Jean crashed into the wall of the gorge at full speed, after which she fell to the bottom. She didn't even have the strength to open her eyes. The monster swam up to her and showered her with a hail of blows. They were so strong and frequent that this series of impacts resembled a powerful rockfall. And as in the case of the rockfall, Jean had no choice but to cover her head with her hands, curl up and hope that Agatha was on her way and was about to come to the rescue, and Jean just needed to hold out until she appeared soon. But as soon as she thought about it, something inexplicable happened. The hail of blows stopped and, for a moment, Jean thought she was dead. But this thought disappeared almost immediately, since the dead are unlikely to experience pain from which their muscles tighten like a ship's rope. Jean carefully removed her hands from behind her neck and looked at the monster that stood over her and stared into her eyes with disappointment. Unexpectedly for her, the monster crossed his arms over his chest and, without taking his eyes off her, said in a calm, almost indifferent tone,
"Get up, the Kraken scum.